Captain Colt. We talked about this last week on the phone, just us, and
Yeah.
we can laugh about it now because you lived.
Yeah.
But you were in the plane crash. Buddy Colt was flying the plane. You were in the plane crash that killed.
Billy, I had to correct you because you're usually right on it. He was trying to fly.
He was trying to fly the plane.
Did you have that one word, trying? It's a difference maker.
But Bobby Shane, who was called the Boy Wonder in wrestling, and who's the guy who gave Lawler his first crown and was the original king of wrestling, and was a tremendous worker and was destined and was already getting involved in booking and was in with Barnett and destined for great things and probably would have been a name in wrestling for the next 30 years. He was killed in that plane crash, and you were on the plane, and Buddy Colt was flying. Who else was on the plane?
Gary Hart.
That's right, because Gary obviously had injuries that plagued him in one respect or another for the physically for the rest of his life. But can you tell us about what happened?
The crash itself?
The crash itself.
Yeah, it's a Wednesday, and booked in Miami. And Miami was a long haul from Tampa, like 275 miles. So that's a long round trip. And, I'm making a couple bucks. So I thought, I'm flying commercial. So I'll spend the night in Miami, get a hotel, and fly back the next day and save the wear and tear of my body, So I was booked on Delta, and that's where I was going. It was a beautiful day, February, and Gary, we both lived in the same apartment building. He said, "Hey, how are you going to Miami?" I said, "I'm flying commercial, flying Delta." He said, "Why don't you fly with us? I'll be riding with Buddy Colt. Buddy be flying. He's a very competent pilot." Quoting Gary, very competent pilot. And Bobby Shane and myself said, "We have an open seat. Why don't you do that? It'll cost you like $40, $50, and you'll be home the same night." And I said, "No, I'm gonna stick with my game plan, Gary. I'm gonna go commercial, And throughout this conversation started in the morning, and then it kind of it progressed and evolved a little bit more as we're getting closer to the afternoon. And finally, Gary had asked me 2 or 3 times, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to, cancel my reservation of Delta, and I'll fly down with them. So we did. Everything was fine going down. Perfect, beautiful weather. Coming back from Miami, we're flying back. Beautiful skies. It's perfect. And it was around Sarasota, which is about 50 miles from Tampa. The weather started getting funky, and funkier and funkier. And the flight controller there at Tampa International told Buddy that Tampa International, where we had departed from, was closed due to weather, but that he could get in at Peter O. Knight Airport, which was a little private airport right off of Davis Island. It's an island, Davis Island, surrounded by water, And so Buddy opted to go that route. Matter of fact, we had a little discussion about it. Hey guys, we can either do that, or we can turn around and go back to Sarasota where the weather's still okay, and we'll rent a car and go back. That's what I wanted to do, and that was my vote. Let's just go back to Sarasota. Play it safe, but I was outvoted. So anyway, as we got closer to Peter O. Knight, the weather really started digressing. I mean, it's foggy, rain, didn't look good. Buddy's not instrument rated, just visual, VFR. The flight controller, Peter and I, trying to bring him in. It's a recipe for disaster, which it was. And on his first approach to the runway, he was too high. So he had to pull back, just not that much, but enough. So he had to pull back and bank over the residential area, which is very affluent neighborhood. And as he was banking over the residential neighborhood, now he's over the water to make that second approach. And I think he just lost, every sense of where he was, lost airspeed, I'm sure. And next thing you know,
You can't see, right? He's just disoriented. You can't see anything. He wasn't
mhm,
instrument rated. It was visual only. So he was like, you're flying blind is the phrase.
in the dark, totally in the
Oh,
dark, Jimmy. And you know what? I mean, it was dead silent in that plane. Everybody knew this is not good. The next thing I know, Jimmy, I saw whitecaps, the water. I
oh,
mean, that was it. I saw whitecaps, and then bang. Uh, yeah, and I was just really lucky to get out of that. I should be dead, you know. Probably there's a few people out there wish I were, but
hey,
probably more than a few.
I guess Gary, he had, I guess all of his teeth were knocked out and he had multiple lacerations and he had
Yeah,
injuries that, Gary was a wrestler originally, before he got into managing and physically that took a toll on him. And,
yeah,
and obviously, Buddy Colt, that was his retirement, his
yep,
injuries. He never wrestled
yep,
again, but
right.
Shane, I mean, I've heard the story. I'm not even going to try to tell it, but the God Almighty, and the way I am about flying, that. But what was it
I've
like?
heard, I've heard, I've
Yeah,
heard.
what was it like trying the? Because I heard Gary tell the story, and I always like to fly with Gary because how many people been in 2 plane crashes, right? I figured I was safe
Exactly.
there, but the trying to find and rescue Shane was just a horrifying story.
Yeah, it really was. You know, first of all, I mean, for me, when I had a very difficult time getting out of I was riding shotgun and I couldn't get out of my seatbelt. You know, I guess maybe the water, the salt water, boom, it just froze up on me. I couldn't get it. I'm going down into the fuselage. I'm sinking, and because it did float for just a little bit. It would not much, but as the plane's starting to sink, I'm thinking, oh man, you've survived this plane crash, and now you're going to drown. And I had cowboy boots on at the time. And somehow, and you got the foot rudders, the pedals there on the passenger side too, up front. And my feet were jammed underneath those pedals because they were just, I guess, just crushed down on my feet. Somehow or another, I got out of my boots. I wiggled out of my boots, and I got out of that seatbelt, and I came to the surface of the water, and it was dead silent. I mean, I could hear water. I could hear water. That's all I could hear, And at that moment, I thought, everybody's dead. You're alive.
Oh,
Yeah, I really thought everybody was dead. And so I yelled out, is everybody okay? Nothing. Is everybody okay? Nothing. Then finally on the next one, is everybody okay? Then I heard Buddy Colt say, I'm over here. Then I heard Gary say, hey, I'm over here. And our voices we were pretty separated, from the impact of this thing. But there was no Bobby. But I do know that since I just came out of that fuselage, they got thrown out. Maybe they didn't have their seatbelts on. Probably didn't. I don't know, or they broke, whatever. But I knew that the fuselage was right below me, and I didn't hear Bobby's voice, and I called out for Bobby a couple of times, nothing. So I took a couple of dives down, but they were futile. I mean, it's dark, the water's cold, you're traumatized, yeah. And Bobby he went down with the deal, strapped in.
That was the story, right? That he hadn't gotten out of his seatbelt, that he was still strapped in when they found him, right?
Well, that's true, but nobody really knows if he drowned or if he was killed on impact.
Yeah.
I never really got any clarification on that one. But he couldn't swim. I know that. Bobby couldn't swim, and he was terrified of water.
That you don't make me want to fly anymore.
Come on, I'll call Buddy.
Already.
I'll call Buddy. Buddy. You know,
yeah, Captain Colt. Well, that's why they call it the terminal. We were talking about that last week, but but no, it had to be, that was one of the most, and one of the most horrifying instances of anybody ever in wrestling, to be put in that position in the middle of the night, dark, cold water, in a plane crash, trying to get out. I know Gary had told me that he staggered and swam, and his, I guess he had, obviously multiple injuries and trying to get out on the shore and etc. When it made a lot of news in
Yeah, it did.
It was because obviously the guys were, celebrities, and everybody knew who you guys were, and it was a huge news thing. But while Iron Mike McCord basically died in that plane crash.
Yeah.